All righty. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Redacted. We kind of threw this one together, but here we are. I'm devoid. I've got my dad, Rev Atheist, here, and a returning special guest, Cyberpunk of the Rec Raiders, a longtime friend of ours. This is Redacted, a live podcast where we talk about Star Citizen and its development. What are we talking about today, Rev?
Well, today we're talking about 4.0, the play tests that have been going on in the tech preview or the EPTU. You know how it's been going, what's going well, what's not going so well. What's the experience been like?
Yeah, we are indeed. So I'm gonna preface this a little bit by saying that Cyber and I have not experienced 4.0 at all. I talked last week about how I have a pact with a friend. Cyber's the friend. We haven't gone in. We're gonna go in for the
This is
first
going to
time
be a
together.
great show.
But we can still talk about it because we're seeing a lot of the feedback that's happening. I'm still watching what people are doing, and we're having discussions about what it's been like. And it's been an interesting sort of change, right? Um, Off of the rip, we know there's going to be a large economic change. How do you guys feel about that? Prices are going up by a lot for a lot of things.
I don't know. For me, it's mixed feelings, right? I kind of like an easy game where it's easy to accomplish things, but at the same time, it's easy to get bored with that, right? So to have adjustments made that give value to long-term effort over just quick rewards. um Hopefully it translates to a reason to stick around and play as opposed to just getting bored in the long term.
Cyber, have you
Yeah.
seen the economic changes we're talking about?
No, I haven't seen them, but I've heard people talk about them.
Well, allow me to kind of uh, explain a little bit, right? So 4.0, we're seeing a lot of price changes for virtually everything, from fuel to weapons and ammo to ship components, right?
I
To
had
put it
heard that the ships
into
themselves had been, in particular, much more expensive.
Yes, much more expensive. To put it into perspective, we're seeing, magazines for weapons go up to like a few hundred credits per magazine, right?
That's
We are
awesome.
seeing, yeah, we're seeing railgun magazines selling for like 6,000 credits, right? Things
I can
like,
hate paying for ammo in the virtual world too.
Oh,
yes,
the size
yes.
the size 9 torpedo sitting at what, like half a million?
I think like 400K, the size 10 bombs for the A2 are like 690,000. Like they
Wow.
are not cheap anymore, right?
Well, listen, I offer up my 28 size 10 torpedoes and my however many bombs my A2 holds as Kickstarter funds for Ymir as well.
Yeah, if it's anything like the current system, we probably won't be able to sell those, right? Because we can't sell factory components off of our ships as it stands. But player market, maybe we
Yeah,
can
I
whore
was
out our
about to
ships.
say, I don't know if this is a safe place where I can talk about certain business dealings that may or may not be strictly legal in Stanton space,
No, you're good. You're good.
but yeah, no, I'm very excited for it, bottom line. I just because I don't wanna repeat exactly everything that Rev so eloquently said, I'll talk about the risk management. I think that those of us who want to see Star Citizen succeed might have on our mind in response to that, and that is that Star Citizen has always excelled, in my opinion, at making a sandbox interesting, and like with the rep and like with the variance of missions and the different sites you can go see, like as far as sandboxes, like on the spectrum of Star Citizen to Gary's mod, they do a good job of making it engaging. But the problem is that even with 30K recovery, even with, sometimes you like it's hit and miss, you can successfully bedlog with your ship. There's just so many things that seem to get in the way of you actually building that long time momentum. And I mean, I know we've all been on cargo runs where we've like, back when 30Ks were a more regular thing, you'd get a 30K and you'd lose way more than 30K in AUEC. But like it's more
Millions.
like, oh well, right, yeah. It's more like, okay, well, I've just spent an hour or 2 hours getting, my Star Lancer set with its mole and with my cargo boxes with my kit and like I've got my friends and like we have to change servers, and like, oh no, well, we can't be making all this money for this time that we're negotiating these things. So bottom line is that, like, I love it that Star Citizen is upping the ante in terms of like the commitment it's asking from its players to actually get momentum and stuff. Because I mean, just to do a brief aside about ship components and stuff, it's not going to be like now where it's like, oh hey, here's the meta loadout for the fighter, we've found it for this patch, it's the meta, everybody go get the meta. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to be instantaneous. You know, like, only people who have lots of support, like your members in the PFC or other organized large guilds like Avengers Squadron, are going to even be able to like get through that barrier to entry to get like the FR86s and the distortion cannons or whatever it is in the future, you know. So like
Right.
I love to see all that. But anyway, it's just like, unfortunately, if Star Citizen doesn't make the fucking elevators work, in particular, I'm shaking my fist at the recent 4.0 patches that, or patch notes that say the elevators are still fucked. And it's just like, guys, like, I'm sure that they must understand how important it is, but it's like, we can't get to, much less test the universe you're building, much less enjoy, if we
It,
can't get the elevators to work.
it's
Yeah.
so funny that you mentioned the elevators. It's like broken elevators are CIG's security blanket. It's like no matter what we do, we can't get away from them, right?
Yeah, you know,
Right.
in that vein, I think it's so. I have to believe that they're aware of this base concept that in order to get people to want to come in and to play test this game and to be a part of the alpha, there has to be a base level of functionality that just works, right? And being able to get out of your bed and to your ship is fundamental. And if you can't accomplish that, then people aren't going to do it. And that's that elevator piece, right? I mean, it's just one of those things. The elevators, they have to work. The trams, they just
Right.
have to work. So
Like,
it's got to be one of those top tier, oh, we've got a little bug. Well, it just became one of the biggest problems in the game.
exactly.
They have to prioritize that stuff. It doesn't seem like they are, but they have to. They have to. But, I mean,
I was just gonna say that server meshing, like, it could be working and we would never know because we can't leave ArcCorp, you know? Like,
exactly.
True. Yeah.
like,
I agree completely. But
sorry to be
kind
so
of go,
impassioned on that.
no, you're good. You're good.
I did,
To
like I
sort
said,
of,
just to clarify, like, I want Star Citizen to succeed, and it's just like the curse of just like every time it's
It
like, hey
is.
guys, something really cool and exciting is happening in Star Citizen, come look, and it's like a fucking dumpster fire.
It
Here,
is.
hold
Yeah.
on. I've got something
But
for that. Hold
oh,
on.
geez, of course you do. You look for that. I'm gonna keep going.
Oh, it
But
didn't
to
work.
kind of
Damn it.
to kind of go back on what you were saying, right? About this barrier to entry, right? I think that is an important consideration, right? The barrier to entry to the meta, right? And CIG, one of their biggest priorities in terms of gameplay is to eliminate the meta. That's kind of a big deal. That's what they've been trying to do forever, to always have some sort of intelligent counter to something, right? To always be able to counter something.
Yeah, they want the rock,
Um,
the papers, and the scissors.
Right, exactly. But with every patch, there's a meta, and that's going to happen. But you're exactly right. Having these components be not only expensive to get, but also expensive to maintain, expensive to ensure, and also maybe just difficult to find to begin with, are all ways that seem like it makes you ask why at the moment. But when you think of big picture, right, it's doing exactly that. It's limiting those really high quality materials to those who can afford and justify them, such as big groups, right? If you're a solo player, unless you're like a dedicated bounty hunter, then you're probably not going to be buying a bunch of these materials. It's going to be one of those game progression things where you spend a lot of time mastering your craft, and eventually you're going to be able to unlock this stuff, and that's fine. But just being able to buy them willy-nilly, that's going to be a large group who has put in the
Yeah.
time and effort to establish themselves so they can outfit a larger fleet. And I think that's really, really important. I also think that with increasing the cost of things like torpedoes and large bombs, it really forces people to consider how else they can accomplish a goal, right? I'm going to use phase 3 of Save Stanton as a perfect example. Okay. In the past, we've had these Idris missions, such as the Arlington Gang Idris, where we get this mission to go and just take out an Idris. But the mission description has always said, destroy this Idris, right? Just blow it up. Okay. Something that I thought was really cool. Have you done any of the Save Stanton missions, Cyber?
Only the first couple where you're just
Okay.
dealing with air traffic.
That's okay. I'm going to tell you something about phase 3 that I thought was really, really cool because it's, even though it's a tiny little thing, it's indicative of something big. They said in the mission description, disable the Idris either by blowing it up or by boarding it and killing the crew. That was in the mission description. Okay. Which is a
Yeah.
big deal because it means that, with these, this economy change and torpedoes now becoming 500,000 a pop, maybe if you can board that Idris, not only will you have an Idris to negotiate with and potentially make money off of, but you're saving money in munitions, and this is going to be a real consideration. And so that
Yeah.
unlocks different avenues for you to go in and accomplish your mission. And
rewarding.
exactly. And you have to think
Yeah.
about it now, which is kind of cool.
I was
So
just
that's
gonna say it's rewarding a more technical and more coordination heavy approach to, in particular. Like the costly approach is the fire and forget approach. But if you don't
right.
mind, I'd like to cut ahead of you just a little bit. And I should say get to the core of I think the topic we're on, and also tie in what Legendary Sheep is mentioning in the chat. Um, I think this is all more or less really good because it's Star Citizen becoming distinctly MMO like and not like an ARPG or an RPG that you play on your own. And I say that as someone who, even though I don't often get to play the game by myself because the limited amount of time I can play, I often devote to my guild and yours, which I love, by the way. It's just like, as someone who in other games is someone who goes off on his own and is a lone wolf and stuff like that, like Star Citizen really, it's very difficult and not really feasible. I should say it's impractical to be that way, especially when it comes to space combat. Well, to say nothing of manning a multi-crew ship or anything like that, or doing all these wonderful things like refueling or rearming or repairing or stripping or all these wonderful things. You ultimately just like, if you come across two people on your single player journey, unless you're like mock Jesus himself, it's not really going to be, there's not much you can do about it. You're going to have to make a decision like run, or there's not going to be like I have this good drop that I got that will let me turn the tide, or I have a talent, or these guys don't know their rotation. Like none of those things will matter. It will be very realistic in terms of like, I am outnumbered against two thinking predators, and like I need to worry about my time investment. Like it's like the wildy in RuneScape. It's like if they kill me, not only do I lose my cargo here, but I lose my ship, I lose my components, I lose my weekend plans of doing
Yeah.
cargo missions and listening to the news and having a
Hours.
good time, hours of time, like and like the stakes is for a video game, it's actually more difficult to get the stakes higher than that, in my opinion.
I agree
Like
completely. Yeah.
yeah, and so like all of that is blood pressure inducing, but at the same time, like we were talking about earlier, it's what makes you stick around to play the game. And yes, there is a valid point in like, oh well, I want to make my game an MMO that people play more, so I'm going to make it so that just you have to do the same repetitive task for 50 hours to get the bauble that we're advertising this month. And like lots of games for live service do that. And
Right.
I don't think Star Citizen is doing that at all by raising the costs or anything. I actually think that the costs for most things, even ships right now, are actually too small. Like for example, like just being honest, as somebody who has been putzing around with just like bouncing between 25 and 100K of walking around money, like I haven't wanted for anything. I've expedited my ships every time. Like I have not been punished at all for
Right.
playing like it's a video game and not real life.
Absolutely. I
So,
agree.
and
I
by the way, hey
completely
Squirrel, I
agree.
love you. I see you in chat.
Speaking of Squirrel in chat, he asks a question. He says, "I wonder if things like torpedoes and missiles are going to be part of the base building thing, part of the full circle." One, absolutely, right. We know for a fact that we're going to be able to manufacture armors and weapons, even ships. I see no reason why things like torpedoes and bombs would not be on that list. But you talk about the full circle, and I think it's worth discussing, right? So we had a big kind of watch party. Rev, it looks like you're like ogling over something there. Your mouth is like a gape. You're just like staring off
Sorry.
his face. Are you good?
Yeah, no, I'm
Are
good.
you okay with that?
So obviously we know Oh Man Squirrel, right? Great guy,
Yeah.
Rec Raider. In the chat, because I'm in the mod mode? It's saying that he might be a possible ban evader, and I was like, "What the hell?" So
Wow,
I
how
was
funny.
just turning off the monitoring
That's
on him and
funny.
making him okay. That's all.
Anyway, he talked about full circle, and it's a really big discussion to have. So we as a group had a big watch party for CitizenCon like we do every year, right? We got together and just watched it all day for both days. And this year was really, really profound. We sort of had to sit down as a group and have a discussion about what does the future of our group look like in 4.0 and 1.0 and just in general in the future, right? And in the past, we've always said, "Oh, we're a little bit of a pirate group. We like things like combat, and we're going to live in pyro, and we'll do some like industrial stuff to maintain what we have to." But we've been primarily a combat group in the past, and after Citizen Con and seeing what the game is becoming, and seeing even just 4.0 and what it is indicative of, it made us sort of reevaluate, and we've kind of realized that in order to do the things we want to do in a hostile space such as pyro, we sort of have to turn into an industrial org that has like some combat facets to it, right? We because we're going to have to afford these things, and we're in a space where our resources are going to be constantly consumed because it's very volatile and hostile here. And so we're pretty much going to have to dedicate resources into not just coming up with funds, but maintaining things, right? Because sure, whoop-de-doo, we have a Polaris, right? Fantastic. Now, how are we going to pay to repair it? How are we going to pay to refuel it? How are we going to pay to rearm it? Right? How are we going to make this money?
Yeah.
And that's just considering one ship. If we're at 500,000 credits for one torpedo, suddenly we're looking at 14 million credits for a full size 10 rearm on that thing. And we're a pretty good sized group, but we can't just shit out 14 million every night, right?
Yeah,
So
no, I mean, Jumptown isn't happening every night.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, we have these Polarises, we have Idris and Javelin and Krakens, we have them, fantastic, but they're fucking useless if we cannot afford to maintain them. And so having this conversation and realizing just what it's going to take day to day to make even just the basic use of these ships possible is kind of freaky but kind of cool. And seeing what's happening in 4.0 is just the first steps to that, and that's a game that I'm excited to play. What about you guys?
Yeah, certainly. Rev, I'll let you go first. It's your show.
I think I was muted because I was doing stuff. Anyway, so obviously I'm interested in the multiplayer, gameplay loops, the engineering gameplay loops, the multiplayer ship, the big things, right? The capital play. So having ways to deal with all of the rearming and the reloading is super interesting to me. I mean, it's obviously something that we're going to have to have some means to dealing with. My hope is that CIG looks at how they can encourage that kind of play through missions or whatever, while at the same time rewarding them adequately so that it is maybe not lucrative, but at least cost effective to take the ships out, because the things that you're going to do with the ship help to at least partially fund the things you want to do with the ship. You know what I'm saying? Missions
If
that
I
you're
could,
not
I
going to be
do.
able to complete with like a few fighters. You need to have that cap, right? But then it's going to pay out sufficiently to let you reload and repair at least a good portion of the damage and ammo that were incurred.
yeah,
So
I agree, and I think they should totally do that. But at the same time, their concept of a death of a spaceship, I'm not sure if they coined that at CitizenCon or shortly afterwards, but I think that the intent they have, giving them the best assumption that they get the game working and we can actually like you can go out in deep space and your capital ship and work out of it without going to port every single time you finish a mission. Like I think that if you play it carefully and aren't just wasting your ammo and stuff all the time, you could feasibly limp by, doing regular work. It would be a little bit like Firefly, where you're just basically paying for the fuel to get to the next place. But people, speaking for myself and the Recreators in their current state, when we're not a large org, but we're a small dedicated group, we can't necessarily always plan on taking on a fleet that would be like a 14 million credit mission that Rev's talking about. Like, even if we were all on, it's just like, well, that's still just us. We'd have to call you guys, and get more involved. But like, if we're just out in Pyro and we're not going to try to pull you off what you're doing, it's our prerogative. And this is my point I'm trying to make. I'm sorry for taking so long to get to it. Is that like the tone of the game becomes like we have to make the big ship last as long as possible. And it's almost like Oregon Trail, where it's like, instead of it being really boring being the big ship pilot in the asteroid field while we're using our prospector that we're carrying around to get fuel, like it's all of a sudden very gripping that I don't hit anything, that I'm watching the radar, that we don't get jumped. Like it almost becomes like Resident Evil in space, because
Well,
like everything is a threat.
let's talk about that for a second though, okay? Because they're moving in a direction where let's say you do hit something. Okay. Let's say you're taking your big ship planet side and you do come down too hard and you belly down and you bust an engine and suddenly you can't fly. The idea behind that is that now suddenly here's this emergent gameplay where you have to fix your situation, right? And we're not really there right now because ship blows up, you die, you start over again. But with what you're saying in mind about the death of a spaceship and how we're moving toward disabling as opposed to
Dev, I don't
destroying.
mean to alarm you, but there's some kind of creature in your room. It was just behind you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. That's my pet Copion.
Amazing.
But as I was saying, they're moving towards disabling instead of destroying, and we're talking about this engineering gameplay and all this. What's really really exciting to me is that even in failure, there can be fun, exciting gameplay that even if it doesn't pay out financially, can pay out in terms of fun gameplay with you and your group, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Phaedron is saying he had a perfect run of one of the phase threes that paid out 468,000. His overall repair rearm on the Polaris was under 100,000 all in. So he's saying in theory, if you get good and operate efficiently and carefully, some stuff will pay off. But if you dent a bumper for 1.5 million repairs, the math doesn't work out. It's all about balance, right? We're still early, and I think this is like an early step in terms of balance, right? Because there's almost always an exploit or something that's going to be completely out of whack. But I think the point is if you do make a big boo boo and that mission becomes a loss in financially speaking, how are you going to do better next time, right? And also, just talking about missions, CIG did talk just a little bit of things in regards to how those are going to work, and for the most part, it seems that they intend for missions to do two things. The first being more introductory than end game content. You take missions early on to learn how the game works. The idea is that they don't pay out a whole lot, even at the higher level missions. Um, and then reputation. You might do missions in order to build reputation, but it seems that the high dollar, the big financial moves are going to be made toward the end game where we are creating our own content, such as with player trading or very, very large scale industrial operations that fall outside of missions.
Yeah.
So I think that there's going to be give and take to both, right? If you get an expensive mission, it may not pay you out the way you hope it will, because maybe you're buying that reputation, right? You need a high level reputation. You might have to spend money to make that happen. So I don't necessarily see those missions paying out a lot, but you're going to have to balance that with, industrial operations or some other money making venture. And
Well, yeah,
that's fun to think.
yeah, and moreover, it all just kind of returns to the same point, which is, I guess, the underlying theme of the next couple patches is that like we're crossing the threshold into where it's an MMO. Like for example, in RuneScape or WoW, you can't be a blacksmith, an enchanter, and a gem cutter. Like you
Yep.
only get 2 skills. Like you have to have people that you can call on to fill those needs, and fortunately for CIG, having introduced a few new friends to the game recently, I was even kind of surprised with how much they enjoyed it and how much they were taken with the gameplay loops that I don't engage with. Like nothing against it. It's just I'm not much of a miner. So my friends are
Sure.
asking me all these questions about mining, and I'm trying to write the PFC in a back channel, like, "Hey, what the fuck is going on with mining? Like, can you please tell me what the hell I can tell this guy?" And so anyway, like they've got a lot to do, and to your point about how, well, if you crack an engine and now your night is about fixing the engine and then limping to some kind of safe harbor, that's wonderful. You're right, because now Star Citizen is like your weekly episode of Firefly that you get to participate in, which is I think what we all kind of wanted when we backed back in 2012.
Yeah.
And honestly, if only there weren't these glitches that break the continuity between sessions, we would basically have that right now, and so just
Yeah, I
like
completely agree.
yeah, just
Could
like
you
just like
imagine, Cyber? I don't mean to interrupt, but could you
don't
imagine?
interrupt me, stop me.
It's late at night. You're in your Starlancer Max, you and the boys. You're loaded up, full of illicit goods. You're flying low on pyro. Suddenly, holy shit, my temperature's spiking. Oh, I've just lost my starboard engine. Oh fuck, you crash land, right? And then you say to yourself, "Fuck, it is 2 o'clock in the morning. I can't stay here." So you lock up your ship. You make sure you've got enough juice to keep the shields on. Maybe you power everything down in the hopes that you don't get detected on radar. But you log off. You come back the next day. You get the boys and you say, "Okay, here we go. Let's fix our problem." You log back in. You're right where you left off, and now you get to fix your problem. How cool would that be, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll get there. So, I mean, they talked about, I want to say the last Citizen Con, about, at least briefly, changes to the way the quote unquote bed logging system works, so that the actual bed isn't required, right? And so, like, if you're on a ship, you'll be able to log out and then log back on your ship as if you had bed logged. So I know that that's certainly on the roadmap,
That's good.
and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
was
going to be an
actually
important part.
really heartbroken recently when I took the Raiders out on the Polaris, and we all tried to we had some kind of problem with ATC. So we were like, no, it's no problem. We'll all bed log and server swap. So we all went to the beds, and it's like, nope, you don't like own this ship, bro. What the fuck are you doing trying to log out on this bed? You're not
Well, you
Cyberpunk.
have been gone for a while, huh? Because that has not worked since 318.
Well, yeah, it's just one of those things where I don't trust bed logging and haven't for so long that I never bothered to try. So
Right.
it's just one of those things. But I had wrongly assumed that they had just figured that out along the way.
Definitely not. Definitely
They've
not.
had brief moments where it worked well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, for yourself. Friends have not been able to log off on your bed
Yeah.
since 318. Long time. But yeah, we are 4.0. We're Kensley of the Rec Raiders, one of your guys in there. He recently shared a cool map of the refuel stations in Pyro. And I sat there taking it in for a little bit. And I got with one of my guys and said, "Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you test if the Starfarer is working in 4.0?" Spoiler alert, it's not. So that's going to be another point in the near future that's going to fundamentally change how people play. Is fuel is going to be inaccessible in a lot of ways, right? Because there's
Wow.
3 different stations owned by 3 different gangs. If you befriend one, you're going to piss off another, and suddenly you're going to be super limited to where you can gas up your ship. So, we're talking about these big ships. It's going to be a blessing and a curse, because now we have these big ships that we can use to traverse long distances. We can't use fighters the same way, but now we have to pay for it, right? So, what do you kind of expect to see uh, in the early days of 4.0 as far as like cap ship or cargo ship to fighter ratio in Pyro?
I don't know. For me, it comes back to this idea that there are core functionalities that just need to work if they want people to play, right? And in Pyro, where resources are scarce, added to that list is going to be things like getting the Starlancer or the Starfarer, excuse me, functioning in such a way that people can fill up and they can go, do that AAA service, you know. Um, but the scarcity of resources in general, the scarcity of having places to land and have automatic repair is great. Um, Assuming that they have the manual systems in place for you to do some of that work yourself, right? So they have the ability to do some cosmetic repairs. They have the ability to replace a lot of exterior or smaller components, guns, that type of thing, which is all wonderful. So there's a lot of repairs you're going to be able to do yourself if you just have the resources, at hand. But with with like the larger ship components, that you can't pull out and just swap. They they need to figure out and get it to a point where you can do that with the larger tractor beam guns, whatever they're getting to do. They need to figure that out, I think. And they need to put some time into making sure that these support gameplay loops are functional, or people are gonna. I mean, they're just not gonna have, the volume of playtime that I think that they really need to make the quick progress that everybody wants them to, including themselves, I think.
I kind of agree with you, and bless
Sorry.
you. I'm gonna put out. We're getting into a little bit of speculation here, so bear with me. I think it would be really cool to see cyber. The Rec Raiders started as a salvage guild,
Yes, sir.
and you kind of have started. We always say practice how we play, so we've kind of started taking things like components and guns and stuff from ships just to kind of get into a groove and understand how it might work, right? um Something I've been thinking about recently with 4.0 coming out and fuel being a precious commodity and eventually air being a precious commodity is, will we be able to hook up to something like a fuel nozzle or an oxygen nozzle and take fuel and air from ships, right? Because I mean, sure, the Starfarer can load up tanks and refuel something, but what if we could just shoot a ship down, disable it, and take its air, take its fuel? Do you think
I
that's
mean,
something
yeah,
that?
I mean, I think that would be it would behoove them to make that possible in some way, even if it was like they have the same sized fuel tank and you can swap them out, even though most fuel tanks aren't actually physicalized. Um,
Yeah, I could see where they might
yeah,
have.
Phaedron says it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I could see them having a means by which you could go down and yes, siphon the fuel, put it into a transfer tank, which is maybe not something that, maybe it's not even something that you can just reattach to your ship, but it gives you a means to gather and then transfer that, like by carrying it in your cargo bay to a place where you could put it into a Starfarer tank or a holding tank that other ships could then refuel from. For example, you've got your landing pads and your hangars in your place that you build. Great. Well, let me go ahead and I've stolen all of this fuel from ships that I disabled. Let me go ahead and go drop it into my fueling tanks at my landing pad. So now I have, as ships land, they have a reserve to pull from. Um,
Phaedron says Star Hose still work in progress. I'm just imagining like a gigantic 8 SCU bright red gas can with a little nozzle on the end. Where you have your tractor beam and you're like glick, 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 pouring
Yeah,
it in.
yeah. I could see like having like a little gas pump, and you like walk over to it, you grab it, and you walk over, climb up a ladder.
Oh my goodness. Oh goodness. That would be fantastic. But
I do
it
remember the
says,
liquid SCU containers.
yeah, that'll be awesome. That'll be awesome, right? Being able to fill up a liquid SU container with some sort of fuel, keep it on board. We're getting into the daydreaming portion of the show, but I'm just imagining the ironclad with its little repair bay tucked
Well,
away in the back. That's got like a big SU container full of fuel, just ready to go. Oh my goodness.
the answer is yours, Squirrel, if I may be so bold. But I was just going to say, to return to the question that you asked, if I'm not mistaken, it was, what do you think the ratio will be like in Pyro between the ship types? And
Yeah.
so ultimately, because of the fuel problems, I think it's going to be I think there's going to be like schools of fighters. So around the fuel stations, there's going to be a lot of PvP, I think. I know that, I mean, armistice zones are a dubious thing out in Pyro at best, but like, I don't mean at the stations, but I mean like 1 or 2 quantum jumps away from those refueling points. I bet there's going to be just like a boneyard of people just fighting because that's where the fuel will allow them to go and come back. But outside of that, down on planet surfaces, out on these like ruined stations that are far and away, like on Lagrange points and stuff like that, I actually imagine that it's going to be almost exclusively medium to large ships of either the combative or the productive variety. And so it's unfortunately going to be people who are trying to like do their thing in a reclaimer or a starfarer getting run up on by people in a hammerhead or a Polaris or something like that. And unfortunately, because of the limited range of the fighters and the fact that the starfarer is not working, like the combat cap is going to have an advantage because there's not going to be an escort.
Yeah,
And
unfortunately.
right, and so I think that it will be kind of interesting because it will, if I'm not mistaken, one of the things that actually does work pretty well in the game right now is stealth, in terms of like powering down your shields dramatically reduces your EM signature like really by like many kilometers. And so like small, very small ships like Mirai Pulses and Furies that can fit inside cargo bays. I actually imagine, and this is my big brain take here, I'm trying to think hard and give you something interesting to chew on for your show. I think that the novel approach will be that the industrial ships will carry with them scout vessels that will go sit 20 kilometers away from them as an early detection device to let them know that they see a Polaris scouting around. Because the Fury, for example, will see the Polaris long before the Polaris sees the Fury, but the Fury can zoom back to the Starfarer or whatever, and help them get out of Dodge, before the Polaris gets to them. So in terms of fleet gameplay, I really struggle to imagine anything outside of that. It's just going to be the cap ships and 1 or 2 fighters they bring with them. And the industrial ships, I think, are the only real benefit they're going to have is like a Pisces to run ground missions or a Pulse to serve as a scout.
I mean, that could be. Old Man Squirrel here mentioned that he says gank gangs are going to be a thing at the other side of jump points like in Eve. I'm going to disagree with that. However, I think the intent, at least, I haven't really spent enough time doing the jumps to really pay attention to what type of scatter there is, if you will, when exiting the jump point. But the line they're selling us is that there will be enough scatter that the gank gangs will have a hard time being successful just camping those points, trying to get people who are jumping into the system.
Yeah, you don't come out at the gate is, I think, an important thing to mention. Like,
Yeah. Phaedron says it's
Yeah.
going to be difficult, just like Rev was saying, is there's going to be tons of exit points spread about 100 kilometers apart. Yeah, he's exactly right. And in order to kind of clear that 100-kilometer gap with any sort of expediency, you're going to have to be in. Well, right now we have nav mode. We know that they're changing it around again, right? But you're going to basically have to sacrifice firepower in order to accomplish the speed necessary to ambush somebody at the jump point. So I think it'll be okay. It's definitely going to require some balance, and it's still going to be one of those things where you have to move quickly, right? Because if you hang around, you are going to get run up on. So you have to get out of the tunnel, and you have to get a move on quickly. You can't hang around. Now, going into the Pyro Gate on the Pyro side, I think is going to be a little bit tougher. We know that it's protected by the UEE, but that is a single focal point that people have to go to,
Yeah, absolutely.
and people will absolutely guard that. And so that's going to have to be one where it's like, oh fuck, we have to go through the point. Let's get a group together. Let's get an escort, and let's have a plan. But I think that Pyro is going to be where we really start to see daily flyers come into their own. and I'm talking ships like the Corsair or the Starlancer. Now we know that, I mean, they're fairly popular ships they begin with, but most of it is just, one person soloing these ships, and they get a couple friends together and they each solo their own ship, right? But with costs going up and fighters being unable to clear space, I'm really excited to see, a consistent set of groups get together and man a Starlancer. I'd love to see these 4-person crews just doing their thing.
I'm sorry to cut in, but I thought you were about to say something and you said something different, but I think it's worth mentioning. Because of the range of them, I mean, maybe the dynamic would be like medium ships like the Cutlass and the Zeus and the Freelancer basically replace the light fighter out in Pyro. And that, yes, would require that each of them have like an extra person or two to fully make use of their capabilities, but like they have the range and the maneuverability advantage to harass the Caps. So maybe the Caps, instead of having fighter escorts, have like, medium escorts, or it's like a Cap and 2 large ships.
That'd be kind of cool to see.
Yeah. So I mean, getting back into just the balance of missions versus, the ships required to accomplish those missions. I know that they're putting a lot of effort into coming up with new missions, especially in Pyro, where they've just got tons and tons of new missions, new mission types, new factions, etc. I'm certainly hoping that as a part of that, again, that they're working on making missions such that if you choose to work as a crew aboard a ship versus flying your own ship, that it's as lucrative or more lucrative than just going out on your own. One thing that is super, in my mind, super important for Star Citizen, they've got all these big ships, they've got all this multiplayer game stuff that they're putting in. If they don't have incentive to be crew, people aren't going to want to be crew. Everybody wants to fly their own ship. They want to have their own ship. I think I saw something not long ago who wants to be a gunner on a Polaris when you own a Polaris? You want to be the captain or the pilot of your Polaris. You don't want to go gun for somebody else, right?
Well, I don't want to disagree with the general statement that you're making, but just like I should say, I realize I may be in the minority saying that, but as someone who has a lot of ships and is more or less satisfied with my own ability to go fly my ship and enjoy it, I actually really like having, for example, an up-and-coming heavy vehicle co-pilot in the Recreator Elthan. He's always kind of been interested in that, but he's, with the onset of 4.0, everybody's put their game face on, which I love to see. And he's been really working with me, sorting out his key bindings. We've been talking strategy and honestly, SOPs for this is the order of operations for when you need to make an emergency jump and what you do if you encounter this glitch or that. This is how you prioritize. And so him learning all those things honestly takes a lot of pressure off of me. And this is going to sound silly, but I should say, being a big vehicle pilot in Star Citizen is a stressful experience if you take it seriously and realize the simple fact that you're carrying everyone's time. If someone fucks up on a turret, the fight gets dragged out or the ship takes some damage. If someone drops a box into the Phantom Zone, we have to do a different mission. If you wing the ship's engine, everybody's wasted their time. And so you take it seriously and it's kind of stressful. And so, like I said, I might be doing that to myself, but when it comes to the actual running of the ships and stuff like that, having someone else to take that burden off of me so I can have some fun and shoot the big nose gun is actually something I look forward to. The problem is just getting somebody who you can trust to do that very stressful thing.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I mean, I don't think you're disagreeing with me at all, if I'm being honest.
Oh, great! I love that.
Because it basically comes down to just balancing the gameplay and making the fun outweigh the garbage of doing it, right? Because
if
the payouts are low, right? If the risk is high, who's going to want to do it?
Right, definitely.
It's going to be very difficult.
And Cyber, you said something earlier, which you're kind of, I don't know if you mean to or not, but you're coming full circle here.
Oh, great.
You talked about how in other games, such as World of Warcraft, you can either you can do mining or enchanting or gem cutting. You're limited, right? You can't do everything. And even though there's not like a physical restriction built into the game that stops one person from doing anything on a large ship like a Polaris or an Aegis or what have you, the sheer level of complexity that all of these individual systems have make it difficult to do that. And so I, for one, am relieved that, within our group, we have a network of people we can rely on who are familiar with different, you know, uh, I'm going to say sub skills, right? For instance, Rev is pretty handy behind the stick of a big ship, right? Because we can communicate and he knows more or less how to position himself. But Rev, I love you, but you are dog shit in a fighter. And that's
Garbage.
just and that's
Absolute
fine,
garbage.
right?
I go straight. I go boom. That's pretty much it.
Exactly. There are other people who are really good at providing clear, concise communications, and those are the ones who you want on comms, so they can clearly designate things to do. Other people, they either they lock up or they get excited and they either talk too much or not enough, and it can become kind of garbled. But some people are really good at it. Those are the people you want talking. Other people can understand complex things that are happening. Maybe you want them in engineering, right? So having a different set of people doing different things, even though there's no physical limitation, is fantastic. And personally, maybe this is selfish of me, but I find few greater joys than sitting in the command seat and giving orders because it's so cool. I like to sit there. I like to see what's going on and then help guide the fleet that way. I used to play Sea of Thieves a lot. Rev, you were there. And I was captain of our galleon, and I more or less would just watch the battle happen, guide our helmsman, and then help run back and forth when we needed to fix things. But having somebody just to observe and to help make sure that we are positioned correctly and that things are getting done, I think is an important role, and I enjoy doing that. So I like that I don't have to do those other things.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So yeah, I'll be so. Oh, yeah, let's talk about that. Here's some theory crafting, some speculation.
I love the daydreaming part of the show.
Yeah, me too.
Isn't it great?
Okay.
Isn't it great?
So when it comes to that separation, right? I love flying the tubs, right? I just really enjoy it, right? Got to roll this way, got to turn that way, got to make sure that the person on the dorsal of the gun has access to the target that we're shooting, and making those. I really enjoy it. If I then also have to worry about, well, I need power to the forward shields, right? Then I'm not so good at that. I need the engineer to deal with that stuff, so that I can worry about putting the ship where it needs to be and exposing the guns to what they need to be exposed to. You talk about sitting in that command seat, on the bridge. That's super cool, right? But if there's not sufficient information for you to understand what's going on in the ship, right, then that becomes a useless seat. Right. If you can't see, oh, we're taking damage to the forward shields, and I have a power outage in main engineering. Oh shit. Right. Then
right.
You can't
exactly.
Then you can't direct that gameplay. Right.
I agree completely.
So there's that piece. Then there's also that next step above. Right. We've got 3 capital ships out there with a support with some support fighters, and maybe we're escorting a couple of cargo ships or whatever it may be, right? Well, now I need somebody who can see the position of all the ships and the threats in the area, right? And I think that's where, like on the Polaris, they've got that space back behind the bridge, that big circle space, and I think they're supposed to be like projecting, oh, this is where you can see all the ships and the general area around, so that you can direct, hey, what you Polaris, you need to go support this other ship that's under attack severely, right? And to direct the fleet operations. That's another level of what I think you might enjoy, right? So maybe stepping out of that command seat and taking some fleet ops.
If I could, Rev, I think that this is kind of turning into a proposal or solution to the quandary we were beginning this segment with, and that was, how is it that you make being multi-crew interesting? And that is that people's own interest and the myriad demands of sophisticated Star Citizen combat kind of force us rather than invite us into these specialized tasks. And like this is something I say for different reasons, but I think is applicable here, is that one of my favorite things about Star Citizen is that it's so immersive and so technical that anyone who's playing it is basically role playing it, and yeah, and so when we're a turret gunner or a comms officer or a heavy vehicle pilot, because we want to be successful, we're all basically doing our best role play impression of the ideal version of those characters, which is amazing,
100%.
but like I think I should say that is a reward in and of itself worth pursuing. The problem is that like no other game really, maybe like shouldn't say no other game, but few other games really reward teamwork that much or demand that much teamwork. Like Sea of Thieves might, Barotrauma might, that bomb defusal game might, but like we were talking about this in the Raiders the other night, and we were saying that the thing that we want to offer as an org, and we just want to keep this in mind, it's the same thing that's always been, is that when you're with us, we have a successful time. Even if we have glitches or stumbles or whatever, we handle them, we keep moving, we come out of it on top. And it's not because we can't have fun if we lose. It's because we all recognize that overcoming something together is the really most fulfilling and fun thing that you can do in these. That's why we do them. Like we take the cargo run secretly, like that, without really admitting it to ourselves, in the hopes that something harrowing happens that makes it a fun story to tell when we finally get back to base.
That reminds me of the orcs from 40K, right? Because even when they lose, they don't lose. It's just, oh well, now we get to try again.
Yeah, the orcs. I used to hate the orcs, which made it really easy to role play as like a loyalist space marine.
Yeah.
But I actually have quite a fondness for them after learning about mech boys.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, no, I think that this is, maybe it would be worthwhile to acknowledge the growing pains that we're going through. And I mean, one could argue that we've always been going through growing pains, but like you said in a personal conversation or just like a chat the other night, Dev, the difference is that it used to be like, oh, well, we'll have a system someday that will solve that problem. And now it's like, well, the system is in PTU right now,
Right.
and so like we're at a very different stage of growing pains where they're not theoretical and they're sometimes painfully practical, like master mode.
You know what's really funny is Star Citizen Squadron 42, whatever, has been in development now for 12 years. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And imagining the development cycle of Star Citizen compared to like a human child, right? It seems fairly fitting. For the first 10 years, it was in its infancy. It was kind of growing up and learning how to walk, right? And now we're getting into the preteen years where it's like it's starting to discover who it is, and it's really temperamental and a little rebellious and kind of
Yeah,
frustrating
I
to work
love
with, but
this
exciting to see how
personification.
it forms into itself,
I
right?
was a little worried about this analogy in the beginning, but keep going. Like it's
I'm
making
just
more
saying,
sense the more you go.
we're experiencing the preteen Star Citizen right now, and I feel like it's only going to take a few more years before it finally comes into its own, and we see what kind of metaphorical person
at
Star
least
Citizen turns out to be.
at least a few years of it hating its parents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's, I don't know. It's just something weird
Well,
that I thought of just now.
and
He says
I
his
think,
child was dropped a few times.
yeah, I was just thinking, as someone who's been around for the 12 years that the game has been in, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the things that we just did the other day were things that we used to have daydream conversations about.
Definitely. Yeah.
And like this analogy of Star Citizen's preteen and it's been in development for 12 years, like it's a little bittersweet because it's like, oh my god, like I'm gonna be an old man or dead by the time this fucking shit's playable, and it's just like that's very disheartening. But at the same time, I really don't think it's hyperbole or cultish behavior to simply say that anyone who's trying to do what Star Citizen is doing is 10 years behind them. And like they they very well might write books about the risks they took and the developments and integrations and transformations that they did to accomplish what they've done, because frankly, based on the way that the rest of the gaming industry is going, it's all retreating inward. It's like
Mhm.
the gaming industry is in a way almost experiencing an indie dark age, and I don't want to say that to like besmirch indie developers, because they're fucking great and they're titans moving mountains on their own. But what I'm trying to say is that like they're retreating away from large institutions like the Catholic Church, so to speak, you know, in the dark ages, and retreating back into small printing presses and things like that to make novel ideas proliferate from a small grassroots root, you know. And so Star Citizen is almost like a monastery, or like CIG is almost like a monastery where the knowledge and wisdom of the old world continues to flourish. And like in the near future, I think that the technological developments of server meshing and the things that they're doing are just going to basically form the foundation of the next generation of gaming, because the indie devs aren't going to be able to make up this time. And the AAA studios, I mean, honestly, we'll be lucky if most of the names that we grew up with exist anymore. Like Ubisoft is going to go the way of Sierra, you know.
Love Sierra.
I know, man, right? And I'm sorry to age myself here, you know, but there's probably people of a similar age in the audience. But I
They
mean,
make
I hope
great
you see the
games.
merit in what I'm saying. But like I'm not trying to just blow smoke up CIG's ass, but like I think especially at this point where we have real tangible growing pains and it's starting to come to life. Thank you, Squirrel. Hail Tony. You know, like we're really crossing into a threshold here where it's like, yeah, we're not idiots wearing clown wigs talking about, well, someday we'll have working multi-crew and bed logging. It's like, no, like Star Citizen is starting to hobble, and it's already outpacing everything we've ever known to compete with it. And so like once it starts to run and jump and fly, like, I mean, I really don't see anything short of them just licensing the Star Engine in like 10 more years. And then there being like, you know, Lucasfilm coming to CIG begging them, hey, can we please have a Star Engine license to try to save our IP? And they'll be like, yeah, sure. We cooked up a Mos Eisley for you 12 years ago. You know,
Yeah.
like, I mean, tell me if you were in CIG that you wouldn't be having these talks over cigars when
No, I
things are
mean
looking good.
you're exactly right. You're exactly right, right?
Yeah, if this game
And
was Star Wars, I would not be playing Star Citizen. I'll tell you what, I'd be that's Star Wars. Love Star Wars. Anyway, no, you're absolutely right though. You know, they've got to be looking forward at some point in time to say, yeah, this is stuff that we can license, and that once we've established ourselves as the pioneers, as the cutting edge, yeah, we can give them some of this, you know, some of this technology and allow people to have some of the things that we do. But and I think that they've done a good job of solidifying themselves, you know, as you know, the leaders in what they're doing, obviously, because nobody else is in this race, if we're being
Right,
honest.
exactly. Like nobody else is even running. They're all like, "That's look at those idiots running in that weird
literally,
direction."
literally,
Like, yeah,
what the fuck are they doing?
You
And
know,
then there's gonna be the day that comes where it's like, oh shit.
yeah. Like so
right?
just to make this relatable, in case there's like a couple people who don't play Star Citizen but do play other games that like don't understand. Like, here's a tangible example of what I'm talking about. So the other night we were talking about strategizing for group ops on the ground, like combined arms, and because of the loadout we were already carrying, Kensley, our genius strategist, he was like, hey, we should use these flares that we're carrying to identify ourselves against other NPCs and make it easy to res us and find our bodies and shit. We should just throw them at places where there are lots of NPCs in cover and have our Fury that's running air support just dumbfire a missile on the flare, you know? And I was just like, wow, that just Star Citizen just became Helldivers, didn't it? Sure did, you know. And so like sure enough, it is, you know. And so like I was just thinking like, holy crap, you know, like even though that wasn't their intent or whatever, like if you just had enough Copians, like you could almost have a Helldivers experience in Star Citizen with no added assembly. You know what I mean? And like I think that that's an easy demonstration of like the profundity of what they've made. Like because there is no shortcut, everything's there. The ground is there, the trees are there, the buildings are there, the light shadowing is there, the NPC pathing on the terrain that's been generated is there. Like there's no smoke and mirrors, so to speak. So because of that, it's just like, oh yeah, well, do you want to have an airstrike? Well, we don't really need to code for that. You just need to like throw that fucking light over there so he can see where to shoot his missile. And
That's
like
true.
no other game can do that.
You're
Like,
exactly right. That is one unique facet of Star Citizen is that they give you the tools to do whatever you want, more or less, and you just have to figure out what that is and do it.
Yeah. So that actually gets into that's kind of segues into a point that I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about the different styles of play, right? Which is that one of the things that CIG has really done well with Star Citizen that's starting to take off now is that the systems of play are complex enough that you can't do everything, right? Because we talked about, you can do one or two things, but you can't do all three or four, whatever. They're complex enough, and it's the complexity that makes it such that you can't. There are no systems in place. There isn't like, oh, you have a skill tree and you can only pick two things. No, you could do all of them. You could be good at all of them, but they're complex enough that you're probably not going to be good at all of them. But then they're simple enough that anybody can do any of them, generally speaking, right? None of them are hard to understand. None of them are hard to accomplish. But there's just enough complexity that's like, no, I have to focus on doing this thing. I can't go do repairs. I'm doing power management. I can't.
Well, to help you out, Rev, it's in terms of putting it into a discussion about game design or game balance. Yeah, exactly right, Squirrel. Racing. Like, would you like a racing game? Would you like Wipeout? Does anyone remember Wipeout from the PlayStation era?
I do. That
it
was like an old 8-bit game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like Gravlev pod racing. It's just like, well, hey, would you like to do that? We'll go over there and have your Gravlevs race. Like, but anyway, I was trying to acknowledge the chat. But anyway, to your point, Rev, the complexity of all the tasks and stuff like that, the approachability of them. I'm trying to recover my train of thought there. The PS1 really shook it. You were saying that's what makes them interesting. I'm sorry, I remember now. So putting it into a game design thing, even if you were the ideal pilot and you could, like, with one hand manage your power and with the other hand use your stick, and then with your voice talk shit at your enemies or command your squad, whatever it would be, like you could do three things at once, you're still paying in attentiveness. So like, if I have to look at my, like, oh no, my ship took damage, I have to look at my self status screen to see what part of me is red. You know what I mean? Like, if I need to
and
talk
I have
to somebody,
to access a specific screen in order to accomplish doing anything about it.
And even if you've honed in on how to do that, that still takes milliseconds. And anybody who's done fighting in Star Citizen, even on big ships, those seconds matter. That's the difference between you hitting or not hitting that rotating piece of debris. But yeah, I think that the sheer immersiveness of Star Citizen, rather than there being a quote unquote gamification of the process, like, oh, you hold X to do salvage, and because of your talent, you do it 25% faster than someone who's not. It's not like that at all. It's like, well, no, you understand this process and are carrying the tools to do it that preclude you carrying the tools for another job, like being a medic. Like, it's just they've really done a good job. I think the word might be a bit of a misnomer, but they've used it sometimes for UI discussions, but it's diegetic. It's that they make a thing that the game either tells you what to do or gives you an objective in a way that's very natural and not forced. Like, it's not like a giant neon sign that says, put the thing in the box. It's like, I want to put the thing in the box because when I put the thing in the box, candy comes out or health comes out. So like, they do a really good job of making you actually go through the desired gameplay loop.
I agree. I agree. We're coming up on our hour point here, and I think Cyber, myself, and Rev could probably have discussions like this forever, right? Because there's always something to talk about. But I think it's probably about time for us to wrap it up. I think long story short is 4.0 is going to be huge, and we are seeing the early steps to what Star Citizen is meant to be, and it's exciting. So, any closing remarks, gentlemen? I'll take that as a no.
No.
I was just trying to give Rev deference, but I was going to say my closing remarks are I can't wait, and I'm ready to dive in with both feet. I've been waiting
Yes.
for years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I think that's it. For those of you who are not already part of the Discord, it's down below, right here, discord.gg/pfcs. Hop in. If you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe. Otherwise, we will be back on Thursday, and we'll see what we talk about then. There is a Star Citizen Live this weekend on base building, so maybe we'll talk about that.
Well, we may not be back on Thursday. So just so you know, next week I have a work trip to California, and I'm not sure I'll be back in time. So if we can,
we'll see.
If we can be, we will be. But
trip.
yeah,
I might have to get Rev to hook me up with a template so I can run a solo show. But
yeah. Well.
Alrighty, guys. We'll see you next time, though. Thanks for watching.
Take care.
Through the asteroid fields across the nebulous glow, our ships